AM 1480 WLEA.
It's Thursday, time for Dr. Christian Kopff.
Next on News Talk, AM 1480 WLEA, the Newsmaker Show with Kevin Doran.
Brian O'Neill in for Kevin Doran again, on with the University of Colorado's Dr. Christian Kopff. University of Colorado in Boulder. Dr. Kopff, thanks for joining us.
Great to be here. Great to talk to you, Brian.
Well, Dr. Kopff, Time Magazine's Person of the Year, they should say Persons of the Year in this case. It's the medical professionals who fought Ebola. I thought it was kind of funny this week. Congresswoman Louise Slaughter of Rochester said to one of the reporters that more people have been married to Kim Kardashian than have caught Ebola.
Yeah, in the United States, yes, that's right.
Dr. Kopff, your thoughts on the choice of the Persons of the Year, I guess, this time?
Well, yeah, it's one of these issues. If what we mean to say is there are people who go abroad and try to help people all over the world, and many of them are Christians, if not most of them are Christians, it's certainly nice to give a tip of the hat to those people. But considering all the things that are happening in the world, and considering the fact that when they get Ebola, then they get flown back here at cost of millions of dollars to be cured, I would have chosen somebody else. I do think it's nice to thank people who, sacrifice part of their careers by going abroad to help people. But I think there's enough problems in the world that, Ebola. If Time Magazine were published in Africa. And there is a similar magazine called Jeune Afrique, Young Africa, published in French. You could call them Person of the Year for Africa. I doubt it is for America, but I don't want to begrudge people that are, sacrificing themselves, although then they want us to spend $2 million on them when they get sick.
I'm surprised it wasn't Congressman Trey Gowdy. Did you see him with Jonathan Gruber this week?
Yes, that was loads of fun. Trey humiliated the learned professor of economics. I of course enjoy seeing people who are, at really good universities and look down upon the University of Colorado just as much as they look down upon the rest of the American people, humiliated. On the other hand, it seems to me a sad day when a person can't say that, Democratic politicians don't tell the truth, and the people who vote for them are silly, or stupid was the word he used.
I thought Gowdy, as much as I like Gowdy, I thought he was a little overboard on that one.
Yeah. Yes, you insulted the American people. What do we have freedom of speech for if we can't insult the American people?
It's just the persistence of the questioning.
Done things that are silly, and the answer is sometimes, yeah, they have, yeah.
I just thought the persistence and the questioning, what did you mean when you said this and all that, I thought that he was a little bit overboard.
I thought, yeah, he was grandstanding. He had a lot of fun grandstanding. The audience sit there with this serious look on their faces. There were a couple of interesting moments. One was the professor refusing to answer the questions on the money he'd made, which, in my opinion, he should be held in contempt of Congress. You do not have to answer questions that would incriminate you. But the payment he received from the federal and state governments is not incriminating. There's no crime involved in being paid by the government. We'd obviously be a wealthier country if it were, but it's not. And he should have been made to answer those questions. Secondly, the representative whose husband had suffered because of the incompetence of the Obamacare rollout, and whose death was partly affected by the incompetence of the rollout, certainly made a good point that this wasn't just a joke, that this wasn't a case of I was irresponsible, that a lot of people lost their insurance, and some people's illnesses have not been treated properly because of the incompetence of the Obamacare rollout, and that is partly the responsibility of Jonathan Gruber, and he needed to take responsibility for doing that. And he did not. He never did. In fact, at one stage he said, "I don't remember what I said." Oh, really? I mean, that surely was not true.
The U.S. Senate's report on torture, or enhanced interrogation, if you want to call it that, that came out this week. Any thoughts on that report or the reaction to it?
Well, the report itself suffers from the fact that it is not the report of the committee. It's the report of the majority of the committee, and the minority of the committee refused to join in. And there had to be some way to get a compromise there, and they refused to compromise. So basically you have, one point of view, which is that the Republican administration of the first 8 years of the millennium was guilty of doing bad things, and we're wonderful people who put a stop to it. I can't see that it substantially tells us more than we knew before. They claim the CIA misrepresented things to them. So the CIA said that they used enhanced interrogation on about 100 people, and the committee report, as I understand, says it was 119. Well, obviously that was spin, but it's not lying. What we've heard from a number of people, including Senator McCain, is the statement that we don't need to do this in order to win our war against terror. And whatever may be the truth of that, the fact is that when we were doing these things, we rolled over Iraq, we landed in Afghanistan, and at least temporarily drove out our opponents there. And since we've stopped doing it, we've been driven out of Iraq. ISIL has taken over half of that country and half of Syria, and we're in the process of being driven out of Afghanistan. So I think that the only reason for those events is not our refusal to use enhanced interrogation techniques, but I do think that that's typical of the fact that we are losing this war, and stopping. When we were willing to do anything to win, we won, and now that we're not willing to do very much to win, we're losing. And I wish the Senator McCain would stop misrepresenting the situation, because what he says isn't true.
Judge Andrew Napolitano on Fox, he had a back and forth, got pretty intense with Megyn Kelly. And Megyn Kelly kept saying that people are going to die, they're going to get agitated in the Middle East when they see this report and news of the report, and people are going to die in revenge attacks. Judge Napolitano said, look, if you want an open society, you have to have investigations and look into these sorts of things, and when something goes wrong, you tell the truth. Your thought on did you see that back and forth between...
I saw it, yes. I saw it. Yes, she was making the point about the irresponsibility of the release of information, much of which is not new. And the problem with the judge's position is that this is a one-sided presentation that did not involve interviews with the head of the CIA, did not involve interviews with the lawyers who made the various decisions about waterboarding during the Bush administration, and no Republican member of the committee supports it, and they're well aware of the fact that if they wait 2 months, it would never be released, because the Republicans will not release a report that only tells one side of the story. And the judge's point that we have an obligation to print one side of the story but not the other doesn't make sense even on his libertarian views, especially when it's presented as a report coming from the U.S. government, which it's not. It's a report coming from one political party, and from people in that party like Dianne Feinstein and like Mark Udall, who are extreme leftists and, are happy to find an excuse to show America in a bad light.
Bill O'Reilly did say that in an open society you have the right to know what government agencies are up to.
Yes, he is in favor of greater openness. He also understood that only hearing one side of the story isn't greater openness. And so I agree. He came down. He's in favor of that. He's in favor of knowing what our policies are. I don't think that we should do the kind of torture that cripples somebody, that leaves them permanently maimed. I understand Senator McCain's personal. They almost never show him walking, and the reason why they don't is he doesn't walk right because of the torture that he underwent. But keeping people awake when they want to sleep and pouring water on their face to scare them doesn't produce permanent damage. And at some extent, when you're facing very remorseless people, you have to do some things that make them uncomfortable.
Ben Emerson, the UN's official on counterterrorism and human rights, wants prosecution of the U.S. officials involved in any torture. Do you think that'll ever happen?
No, I think it'll never happen because the Obama administration is well aware that they want to get out this news that the previous administration were evil torturers. But what they don't want, of course, is to have a situation where each administration puts the previous administration on trial for criminal activities. And I hate to say it, but almost everybody in the government on the federal level, I don't mean this for state or local people, on the federal level do things that are of ambiguous legality. And if we start putting people, they understand this, if they put members of the Bush administration on trial for what they think is wrong, they're going to suffer the same fate when they're not in office anymore. So, no, I don't think it'll ever happen because it would be suicidal for any administration to begin that process, which would then never end. Each time there was a new administration, there'd be a new set of trials. And you just can't have a government work if that's what happens.
We're talking with Dr. Christian Kopff, University of Colorado in Boulder. And when we get back, we'll talk about New York City Democrats cracking down on police with tough new laws and the Jon Stewart, Brian Kilmeade back and forth. Back on the Newsmaker Show, Brian O'Neill in for Kevin Doran, on with Dr. Christian Kopff here on a Thursday, December 11th. Dr. Kopff, kind of a big thing in the media this week. Brian Kilmeade on the Fox and Friends TV morning show criticized Jon Stewart for making a mistake. Apparently, Stewart said that a police officer killed someone in California. It wasn't the case. The guy died of a drug overdose, and Jon Stewart lumped all of those cases together with Eric Garner and the other cases like Ferguson, Missouri. So Jon Stewart had to apologize for that, and he didn't like it. And he played clips of how Fox's Brian Kilmeade went after him, Jon Stewart, on this topic. Here's what Kilmeade said, and then we'll hear Jon Stewart's response.
If you want to fine-tune community relations with officers, fine. But now it's everybody's feasting on you guys. Just so you know, just to put these stats in case Jon Stewart wants to include this tonight, 85 NYPD officers were killed after 9/11.
And then right afterwards, Stewart comes on and says this to Brian Kilmeade.
You, Brian.
Seriously. Yeah.
That is so far out of line that even within the confines of this bit, ostensibly accepting blame for everything that's coming my way for the factual error, I really do regret you. Ears, eyes, nose, and throat. In fact, if I hadn't told you to off, I would have had to apologize on tomorrow night's show for being factually incorrect.
Dr. Kopff, your take.
Well, Mr. Stewart wants to have it both ways, which is what's so unamusing about him, is that he has a political party line that he promotes every single day, and then when you object to it because it's misleading or actually wrong, then suddenly he starts dropping the F-bomb, and which his audience thinks is the funniest thing in the world, obviously. I mean, I remember in 5th grade, I used to think curses were funny, but then, you get to 7th grade, and you sort of get out of that particular habit. He has no answer to it. Police are also killed in this country. What about that? That's the point that Kilmeade is making. And his only response to it is to curse. And these idiots in his audience think it's funny. I mean, it's really a sad day when somebody that low on the level, if he has a legitimate point to make, then he ought to make it. But legitimate points are not made by dropping the F-bomb instead of any rational conversation. And they're certainly not made when your audience is so silly that, they think this is funny.
Story here in New York State, and that's because of the Eric Garner decision. A lot of the downstate Democrats in the New York State legislature are really working hard to crack down on police brutality. They believe that the Eric Garner case was improperly handled. And the legislation they've come up with, they want to make it so that the New York State, and I don't know if you're familiar with him, Dr. Kopff, the New York State Attorney General, he's a guy named Eric Schneiderman. He's a New York City Democrat. Our state senator for our area, Tom O'Mara, came out against this new policy that the New York City Democrats are pushing for in the state legislature. What they want is for all police-involved deaths to be investigated by the state attorney general's office. Senator Tom O'Mara is saying, hey, Eric Schneiderman's just going to go along with whatever the popular movement is at the moment or cave into public pressure and probably make the wrong decision. Don't know if you've been following this at all. Wondering your thoughts on this this new movement in the New York State legislature to crack down on cops.
It's, in my opinion, overreaction to very special cases, both of which were reported according to a narrative, and both of which turned out to be more complicated. It certainly doesn't defend the action of the police to say that the situation both in Ferguson, Missouri, and Staten Island was more complicated than it was initially presented as being. And it simply, in the one case, in Ferguson, we had a single policeman firing, and the situation was not the way it was initially presented, that the person was trying to surrender. We know from the forensic evidence that wasn't true. In the case of Garner, there were a set of policemen who themselves were obeying the orders of their commander. It's easy to see now that, 5 people sitting on top of somebody. It's constantly said that he was choked to death. He died in the ambulance of heart failure after 5 policemen basically sat on top of him at the orders of their commander. It's a complicated case. It doesn't mean the police behave properly, but, rule number 1 is don't resist arrest. One thing that's spread abroad by people like Eric Holder is that only black people get pulled over by the police. It's not true. We get pulled over all the time, and when we do, we smile and we say, "Thank you, officer." Well, thank you very much, because what's the possible point of doing anything else, right? I mean, guys, as Charles Barkley said, to protect us, and every once in a while they pull us over and ask to see our license, and we smile. We don't get into a fight with them. And then they say, well, how come they're shooting these people? Well, they're fighting them. Don't resist arrest. Don't fight. That'll solve almost all these cases. Not all of them, by the way, and it doesn't mean the police never misbehave. But to blame grand juries because they don't indict everyone brought before them, the problem with the grand jury system is they indict too many people. Then you complain that they're not indicting enough people. You got to make up your mind. It's one or the other.
We've been talking with Dr. Christian Kopff, University of Colorado in Boulder. Dr. Kopff, any final thoughts before we go?
Well, yes, we're living in a world in which people's narratives have become more important than the facts of the case, and we see this with the Senate committee release. We see this with the various police situations. We need to learn to have a correspondence theory of truth that says you look at the facts and not just the larger narratives. And if we do that, we're going to be much more reasonable, in my humble opinion, and much less driven by kinds of narratives created by people like Rolling Stone magazine and Senator Dianne Feinstein.
Dr. Kopff, thanks for joining us.
Great to talk to you.